Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Man, we got a packed house this morning. Amazing. I guarantee you, just look next to you, there's probably an angel sitting there, right? So stand strong with Yahweh. What a great day. I wore my green jacket because I want to convince myself that it's spring already, right? I love 74 degrees today, maybe 50 something tomorrow though, but at least we're not in Utah where it's snowing, right? But snow is needed to water the earth. So got a lot I brought all of my books, so but I want to read something in particular to start with. With that last song that you sang, I thought this kind of went with it. This is called the Olive Tile of Scriptures, and he always writes a little thing at the front of each portion. And of course, this portion this week is bow. We're going to talk about that just a little bit. It says in Exodus 10:2 claims that the purpose of Yeshua's hardens Pharaoh's heart is so that Moses may tell his descendants what Jehovah did in Egypt. Wow. So that they may know the Father. We always ask ourselves, oh, that's not fair. God hardened his heart. What was the purpose? That we may tell our descendants and that we may come to better know Jehovah the Father. Well, we'll get started here on the first slide, maybe. All right. This is bow, as we said. And bow, normally we would say, means to go or to come. So I want to look at the Paleo Hebrew, and because that we understand in the Hebrew language that every letter has a meaning. So when you put these letters together, then you have a fuller meaning of what's being said. In the Hebrew, bow is bait, vav, olive. 3 letters in the Hebrew to make up bow. And we just put it bow, okay? So when you look at the Paleo Hebrew, bait means house. Of course, it also means strength. And I made up some of these, just those that would like to have one. They're on the back. A chart that actually shows all the Hebrew letters, their meanings, what they look like in the Paleo, and what they look like in the modern. But the olive, the bait means house or family. Okay. The vav means a hook or a nail or a bridge or man or secure. Okay. And then the olive means the head, strength, unity, first, crown. So when we put all these together, what is he really saying when he says bow? He says to secure the strength of the house. The Father coming and going to secure the house. So when we look at it in those senses, everything that God commands and says for us to do, he's trying to secure his house here on earth. Because he's the head of the house, just like each one of us as the head of our own household, we are responsible for securing our house, right? We are also responsible for providing food, clothing, shelter. But we also set the rules in our house. So that's what he's saying here when we use this one little word, bow, to go. We say, well, we're going to go out. We're going to come in. What is the deeper meaning of it? And bow actually, through the Latin into English, is where we get our word via. Via the coming and going, or how we're going to get someplace, or how we're going to go or to come someplace. Well, you could use the word via, and we're going to go across town via our car, to get into the car and to go and to come. So just to give you a kind of a foundation of it, there'll be a whole lot more talked about, I'm sure, in Roundtable. But I just wanted to kind of share that with you, because sometimes we just look at these words and we just see the surface meaning of go or to come. What is he really saying? Because we know that when you start in Genesis, it's Bereshit. In the beginning, Bereshit. In that is the house, the land, and all the other things that go with it, the family. So as we move into Exodus 10:1, is it on here? No, it's off. There it is. All right. As we move into Exodus 10:1, we see that where this word go is used. And Yahweh said unto Moses, go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I might show these my signs before him, that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and of thy son's son what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know how that I am Jehovah. And Moses and Aaron came unto Pharaoh and said unto him, thus saith Yahweh Elohim of the Hebrews, how long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. Of course, one of the very first songs was to humble ourselves, right? To humble ourselves. That's what God calls for us to do, is to humble our hearts before him. That's what he wanted of Pharaoh, but also what he wanted of the children of Israel. To humble themselves before him, to look to him as the one that will secure the house. Follow my rules and I will secure and I will provide and protect and give you your substance. He spent 40 years providing for them. Food every day, water, all of the provisions, the heat and the cool. Just think about it. A cloud by day, a fire by night. Because in the desert, it gets 120-something degrees or more in the day. At night, it gets down to freezing. He is that provider. He is securing his house here on this earth. So we're going to move on to Exodus 12. And really, this is the meat of what I'm going to talk about today. And it says, and Yahweh spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. This day came you out in the month of Abib. So you look up the word Abib, and it's 24. Abib. From an unused root meaning to be tender, green, that is a young ear of grain. Hence the name of the month, Abib, or Nisan. Abib, ear, green ears of barley. Okay, so in the very name of the month, we understand the meaning of that month means that it's It's in its green stage. We see the word Nisan here. This is a word that was picked up actually out of Babylon captivity. It was not the original word used for the month of Abib. And you will see it in the Jewish calendar. They use Nisan. But Aviv has a deeper and better meaning because it means actually spring. So we read on, and Moses stretched forth his rod towards heaven, and Yahweh sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground, and Jehovah rained hail upon the land of Egypt. This is one of the plagues, right? To get a setting of when all of this took place. And we read on, and the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was boiled. But the wheat and the rye were not ruined, for they were not grown up. So the question is, so what time of the year would this have been? There's these little markers that we can look at, because it really doesn't say, well, this is the spring, yet it does. And why is this important? Well, the reason it's important because as we begin to follow all of God's rules and regulations, laws, his feast days and things, we need to know when that these things begin. Do they begin in winter or summer or when? Can we prove it by Scripture? You know, we take sometimes for granted that, well, you know, Passover is beginning of the year, and the beginning of the year is at around the vernal equinox, and that's the beginning of spring, so that's got to be the beginning of the year. Well, but if we look in the Scriptures, then we can prove it. We don't have to say, well, I think, or we believe, or whatever. So as we go on, we're going to, one of the citing here was that the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear. In other words, it had already come up out of the ground and formed all the little ears on it, but it was still green. It hadn't totally matured. So it didn't mess with the wheat or any of that, because the wheat doesn't come up in the spring. It comes up later. In fact, we see in the process of the feast that it's 50 days after Passover that we have wheat coming to full maturity. So that's the reason why that Jehovah has pinned all of the feast days to the agricultural society that they lived in, to remind them when this harvest happens, this is when the feast happens. So we're going to back up a little bit and look at one other place that we can scripturally prove that when is the beginning of the year. And it's in the beginning. It's in Bereshit 1. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters. Look at these words that I've underlined. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. And Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim divided the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So keep these things in mind as we go along, because straight off, we got a question. Straight off, we're going like, what is this about? Why? How can you have light and darkness on the first day? As we go along, we'll see that the sun and moon wasn't created on the first day. So how could we have light upon the earth? Because there was darkness first. The earth was created out of darkness into light. And as we go on and read some more, it says, I'll probably cut off that part. And Elohim said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it be divide the waters from the waters. And then as we go on, it says, and Elohim made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And Elohim called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Here we see a pattern in creation that will last eternity on the earth. Darkness first, and then light. Evening first, and then light. Makes a day. That's when it all started. Did God ever change that pattern? And Elohim said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And Elohim called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And Elohim saw that it was good. And Elohim said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, the fruit trees, yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And Elohim saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So, what time of the year did creation start? It would have had to been what we call spring, because that's when the grass and the trees and everything began to grow and to bud and to turn and produce fruit. And here it is, the third day, and he says, I want the grass and things to grow starting today. One more sign that when is the beginning of the year, just like it was in the beginning in the creation. That would set the season that the earth was created in. The third day. Now we've had, as we go on, we're going to see, and Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, for seasons, for days and years. I said, what? What happened? We've already had light. We've already had darkness for 3 days. Now suddenly he says, we're going to create the sun and the moon. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. What did he make them for? Signs, seasons, days, years. So here's the beginning of God's calendar, because that's what it takes to make a calendar. Signs actually relate to the star constellations, because originally the star constellations were lined up with the months in the beginning of the year. And the constellations themselves spoke entirely about the redemption of mankind on this earth, showing when that the Messiah would come and what would happen during those periods of time that the constellations was pointing towards. We see for seasons, if you look up seasons in the Hebrew and you run it down, it's Moed, set apart time. All of God's feast days, that's seasons. So remember this word, because as we go on, we're going to see it repeated a couple of times. And we're not talking about spring, winter, summer, although those are seasons, but these seasons here, when you look in the Hebrew, it shows that they are the feast days. And he set them for days and for years. Okay? And Elohim set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. He's already done that. So what are we looking at? And Elohim saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So where did this light come from for 3 days? Anybody have any ideas? There was no sun and moon. Yeah, Yeshua himself, because as we'll read later in this, that he is the light of the world, right? Why 3 days? Points directly to his death, burial, and resurrection, that the world would be without the light of Messiah for 3 days. So we're going to move on to this. So what makes a calendar? If you're going to sit down and create a calendar, what ingredients would you have to have? You would have to have a day, a week, a month, and a year. So what determines each? This is probably 6th or 7th grade science, and our science teacher right there could probably stand up there and teach you a lot more about that than me, because that's what you teach, right? 7th grade science. So this is elementary that all of us probably saw in school. So a day is when the earth turns on its axis. One turn takes about 24 hours, making darkness and light. That's what makes a day. Not 12 hours, not when the sun comes up, because what did the pattern say in creation? Darkness to light. Okay, a week is 7 of these rotations, making 7 days. A month is how long it takes for the moon to rotate around the earth, which is 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds. A solar year, now listen to this closely. A solar year is how long it takes for the earth to rotate around the sun, which is about 365 1/4 days. There's actually a mathematical shows, it's got 0, 0, 0, 0s and so forth and so on it. But the lunar year is only about 354 days long, because you take 12 times 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds. And it shortens the length of time that the moon goes around the earth 12 times. It takes about 354 days, and there's some dot 00s or whatever. So when you're creating a calendar today, it creates a problem. When you make a solar lunar calendar, is what the calendar was originally, because we saw it in creation, right? The moon and the sun being created on the same day. So they would come back every year to that same place. They would be in harmony. But as we see in Genesis, the account about the flood, we can get a grasp on what was taking place prior to the flood. Genesis 7:11 says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. second month, 17th day. And that's not the 17th month, or the second month, 17th day of Noah's life, his 100 years. That's not what it's saying. And it says, in the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month, and the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. Okay, so what are we looking at here? Second month, 17th day is when it began to rain. The waters become over the earth. The ark came to rest on the 17th day of the 7th month. That's 5 months. Right? But here's, it's going to show you there's something interesting here. So we have 150 days. That was exactly 5 months, which would make a year of 360 days. Because you got 5 months of 30-day months. Yet we saw that a month is 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, 3 seconds. We don't have 30-day months today. Yet then he did. So therefore, solar and lunar were totally together 360 days. Every 360 days was a new solar and a new lunar year. So the lunar and solar year would be the same length as was in creation, being that the moon and the sun were created on the same day, new moon beginning the first month, the sun beginning the year, perfect harmony. But sin caused the flood and the changes to the earth's orbit around the sun and the moon's orbit around the earth. And we can ask the question, why or how? Well, as you read the history of the creation of the earth, it shows that the earth was enveloped in a water jacket, basically. It was almost a tropical. Because he says when the fountains of the deep broke up, also it says, and the heavens came down, the water, because he had separated the water to the heavens and to the earth. So it was in a more of a tropical thing. Because it says in Noah's time, it had never rained. Dew came up from the earth and watered it. So when you take all the water that's around the earth, put it on the earth, just in sheer physics, you're making the earth a whole lot heavier. You're removing that shield so it moved the earth out away from the sun a little bit. Otherwise, you think it's hot in West Texas. If the earth hadn't moved, you wouldn't be able to live here. Same thing with it created the orbit of the moon a little different. So here's a question that's asked, because we said that first moon that was created was a new moon. How can we prove that? Or can we prove it? Because some people says, well, you don't know what that phase that moon was in when it was created. It could have been a full moon. Or it could have been in the first quarter. Or it could have been a fingernail. Can we prove that it was a new moon? Here's the proof, because it's in the scriptures. Why would the moon that was created on the fourth day be a new moon and not a full or partial moon? For one, it says that they were created for seasons, appointed times, days, and years. Also, the day starts in darkness, just like there was darkness upon the face of the deep, so the moon would have been created in darkness, right? Because it says the fourth day was the evening and the morning. It says he created two lights, the lesser light to rule the night, the greater light to rule the day. So does it not make sense that the moon was created at night, because it was created to rule the night? And that night was darkness. So you wouldn't be able to see the moon. So it would be a dark or invisible moon or a new moon. Hopefully you will get a better understanding of some of these things, because you will find in this walk there's a lot of controversy over the new moon, what it looks like, when it is, so on and so forth, and how it sets the feast days. But our anchor and foundation is in the scriptures, not what we did a long time ago, not after what we considered Israel or whatever. But what did the scripture say? What does it show? Is it showing a fingernail moon? Because here's the other thing that you can look at. It had to be a dark moon, because question is, does the moon have its own light? No, it does not. As science shows, the moon only gets its light from the sun. It's nothing more than a mirror to reflect the light of the sun. That's why in Scripture we can find that Israel is associated with the moon, because we are to reflect the light of Messiah, right? So then the moon takes on a greater meaning than just an object in the atmosphere. Because we said that Yeshua was the light of the world for 3 days. We are to be that moon to reflect his light in our life to the world. So, to keep the Passover in its season, as it says in Exodus 13, 9, and 10, as you go on and read all of the Torah portion this week, and it reminds them, and it shows them how to keep the Passover, what to do, what days, and these types of things, Feast of Unleavened Bread. But it reminds them, he says, you will keep this perpetual in Israel forever as a memorial of what took place in Egypt. But he says in several places, he says, make sure you keep it in its season. And we're talking about the physical seasons of spring, summer, fall, winter. So therefore, he's put a hedge around the idea that this is the beginning of the year. It always will be the beginning of the year. So there is when you've got to have the Passover. You cannot let it slide and move, because as we see in a solar lunar calendar, the difference in the days makes the spring or the first month of the year start to move back, right? And after about 3 years, you're about 30 some odd days out of whack with the beginning of spring. So as we go on, we'll see some of the things. So we would have to add a month every 3 to 4 years. depending upon looking at the vernal equinox. Why do we use the vernal equinox? That's another question that we run into when we start looking at calendars. A lot of people say, well, the vernal equinox, that's a pagan thing. No, it's not. Vernal equinox is a natural phenomenon that God created when he created the world. Vernal equinox, vernal means spring. Equinox means when there's equal time in the night and in the day. It happens twice a year. One in the spring, and the other is called the autumnal equinox. Autumnal means fall, in the fall of the year. Once again, when the exact time is in the night and in the day, vernal equinox. So, in creation, the sun and the moon would have been created on the vernal equinox, or it created the vernal equinox, right? If they're created at the same time on the same day, one being a lunar, the other being a solar, and that was the beginning of the year, beginning of the time, it would have been equal time in the night and in the day, vernal equinox. So that is one of the signs that God has placed in the heavens that man cannot monkey with, although they have. Because later, two things happen. One is what we call progression of the equinox. Because of the way that the earth has moved in its orbits and things now, the vernal equinox is not exactly at the same time that it was in creation, nor was it at the time of the Messiah. In science, or in calendars today, when you look at it and it says the beginning of spring, March 2021, in reality, that should be, the vernal equinox should be equal, but it's not on March 2021. And this is one of the things we run into when we started studying a calendar. When we wrote to the Naval Observatory, we asked them, is the vernal equinox 2021? Scientifically? Is it really happening then? And they said no. That it was a few days before. But it has been stamped as beginning of spring, as the vernal equinox 2021. Some of that is because of the Gregorian calendar. Because that he wanted to keep that time as it was around the time of Yeshua. So they arbitrarily set that time. But it's the signpost that God set in the heavens, showing the beginning of the month, the beginning of the year I'm talking about, the beginning of the year, solar year, because why is it a solar? Because the vernal equinox is a solar event. When we come in line with the sun, where it's 12 hours at night, 12 hours in day, that is a solar event. All right. Says the Gregorian calendar is only a solar calendar, one that's on our wall, the whole world follows, and all businesses, transactions, and whatever. That's the calendar that everybody follows. It's only a solar calendar because they wanted to get rid of the lunar, because lunar points to God's feast days, God's Shabbats. There was only one good thing that Gregorian calendar did, was to insert the leap year in February. because without it, they were getting off. And so at that time when this calendar came into existence, that was the big reason that a lot of people took a hold of it, because it corrected the time. In fact, it did not change the weekly cycle. It only changed the number of that day. It added so many days. You can look it up. Go on Wikipedia. Look at Gregorian calendar. All of this stuff that I'm telling you, look it up. Study it. Don't take my word for it. So then we find that the Muslim calendar is only a lunar calendar. That is why their holidays roam around the year. Ramadan and these type of things can happen in any season around the year. But Jehovah's calendar is a solar and lunar calendar together, because he says to keep his feast in their right seasons. So you have to have a lunar and a solar calendar together to be able to do that. So we're going to go back to Leviticus 23. It says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feast. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. It is the Shabbat of Yahweh in all your dwellings. These are the feast of Jehovah, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim whenever you want to." No, in their seasons. And then he goes on in Isaiah. It says, "For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, says Jehovah, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says Jehovah." Even in the earth made new. So they must be pretty important, that from creation to recreation, the Shabbat is there, all of his feast days are there. What a glorious time that will be when we see all mankind coming before Jehovah in the Shabbats, in the seventh-day Sabbath, the monthly Sabbath, and all of the yearly Sabbaths, to worship him. See, that's the most important word right here. It says, all flesh will come to worship me. When you track down worship, it means to bend the knee, to no longer use ourselves for our pride, as was talked about, humble ourselves, to put away what we want to do and what we feel like doing, and coming and worshiping him, the great creator of this universe. So it's the same as what we see in creation when he gets to the seventh day and he says, he hallowed it. He set it apart. Then when Yeshua himself says the Shabbat was made for man, not man for the Shabbat. And he says, oh, by the way, I am Lord of the Shabbat, because I made it for you. This comes out of Ezekiel. No, this is Ezra I'm talking about. Ezra 46, right? Ezra 46:1 says, Thus Sovereign Jehovah, the gate of the inner court that looked toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Shabbat it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. And the prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate, and the priest shall prepare his burnt offerings and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. There's that word worship again. Then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. Likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before Yahweh in the Shabbats, plural, and in the new moons, plural. Interesting. Sorry, this is Ezekiel 46, not Ezra. Interesting. Nehemiah 13:15 says, "In those days I saw some treading wine presses on the Shabbat, and bringing in sheaves and laden asses, as also wine and grapes and figs and all manner of burdens which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in that day, wherein that they sold their goods. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Shabbat unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that you do, and profane the Shabbat, the Sabbath day?" So we get an indication that Jehovah doesn't want us to not only work, but he didn't want us to buy or sell. And he goes on, "Did not your fathers thus, and did not our Elohim bring all of this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Shabbat, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened until after the Shabbat. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day." He had to physically shut the gate. Once again, we come back to this idea of when in Exodus, God gives at Mount Sinai all these rules and laws and things, and Moses, he tells Moses to go tell the people this, and the people told Moses, "We'll do whatever thing that he says." And what did God say? He says, "Only if they had a heart." So, really, it's what's in our heart, right? It can be just rules and regulations that we have to do, or it can be in our heart that we want to serve Jehovah. Move to Amos 8:5, saying, "When will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Shabbat, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephod small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit?" Numbers 10:10 says, "Also in the day of your gladness and in your solemn days, in the beginnings of your months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before your Elohim. I am Jehovah, your Elohim. I am setting these. I am giving you these. Not man, not Israel, not the rabbis. I'm giving you these. These are my feasts that I'm giving to you, where you can be my people and I will be your Elohim." First John, we're going to back up just a little bit. Actually, this got rearranged when I rearranged the deals, and this should be back when we were talking about the creation week. It says, "Then this is the message which you have heard of him, and declare unto you that Elohim is light, and in him is no darkness at all. Because he keeps telling us to walk in the light because you're not in the darkness. What does that mean? Does that mean physically? Spiritually? If we're walking not according to his statutes and judgments, his feast days and these types of things, are we walking in the light? Because he says he is the light. I am the light. These are my feast days. These are my Shabbats. If you want to walk in my light, this is what you do. Matthew 12:39. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. That's why that he was the light of the world for 3 days and 3 nights in the creation. You can look up 3 days, and there is a ton of them. Just like when they started to, before they went into the land and actually crossed over the Jordan, he told Joshua, he says, in 3 days, you're going to cross over. He says, take a bath, wash your clothes, circumcise all men, for in 3 days you're going to cross over. You look so many times how 3 days comes into prophetic signs and movements. Then we see in Revelation 21:10, he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from Elohim. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. For the splendor of Elohim did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. So we see the world being recreated in the same way that it was created originally. Right? He's going to be the light of that. The Garden of Eden is going to be recreated there. We're going to walk in his light. We're going to be light beings. And the nations of them that are saved shall walk in the light of it. Does that mean the sun and the moon will stop? There will be no day and night. There will be no months. There will be no Shabbats. There will be no feast. Is that what he's telling us? Read on, we'll see the rest of the story. It says, And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their praise and honor unto it. And he showed me a pure river of water of life. Where was the tree of life? In the midst of the garden, right? Clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of Elohim and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life. Tree of life. Just like the Garden of Eden. Which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. So we still have to have a sun and a moon and the stars to have a month, right? Pardon me? Most definitely. It says because the Lamb, or the Torah, is going to be there, right? Aren't they synonymous? I am the Word. So we're going to have the tree of life bringing 12 manner of fruit. So it kind of gives an indication that when the earth is recreated, it's going to be on the same calendar it was originally. There would be no need of a 13th month. It says 12 months. Interesting. And the foundations of this city, what? Has 12 gates. 12 stones, the 12 stones being the apostles, the 12 gates being his Elohim, what is it? Disciples. That's the word I'm looking for. And we see, as you read in Revelation there, it says that the foundation of this city has 12 gates. and over each gate is a name of the 12 tribes of Israel. I didn't see one, because the Gentiles will be part of Israel, right? Right. Because as we accept the Messiah, as it says in Galatians and other places, it says, when you accept the Messiah, you are the child of Abraham. And he says, if Abraham is your father, you will do the works of Abraham. And the works of Abraham was, he says, he kept his laws, his statutes, his judgment. And he taught his children to do that. Isaiah 45 says, For thus saith Jehovah that created the heavens, Elohim himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it, he created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am Jehovah, and there is none else. I have not spoken in secret, in a dark place of the earth. I said not unto the seed of Jacob, Seek me in vain. I, Yahweh, speak righteousness. I declare things that are right. Assemble yourselves and come. What? Come. Bow. Draw near together, and ye that are escaped to the nations, they have no knowledge that set up the wood for their graven image, and pray unto an El that cannot save. Tell you and bring them near, yea, let them take counsel together. Who hath declared this from ancient times? Who hath told it from that time? Have not I, Jehovah? And there is no Elohim else besides me, a just El and a Savior. There is none besides me. That is what we say every Shabbat, right? He didn't hide it. He didn't put it somewhere in the Scripture that only somebody could find it that had a direct epiphany or something. He laid it down pretty simple, because he said, the gospel is so simple a child can understand it. Remember this and show yourselves men, bring it again to mind. O you transgressors, remember the former things of old. For I am El, and there is none else. I am Elohim, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning. And from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all of my pleasure. Declaring the end from the beginning. Definitely shows us that if we want to know what going to happen in the end, because we just read the end in Revelation, right? The earth made new, the heavenly Jerusalem coming down, having the tree of life, coming together one Shabbat to the next Shabbat, on the Shabbat and the new moons, declaring the end from the beginning. The beginning is in Bereshit, right? So we follow that pattern, we should not have any problem. So we're going to touch on this. I don't remember what time we started. Do you? I know it was late. Was it 12? I've got about 3 or 4 if y'all want to continue on. It says, so what had happened that Jehovah had to say to Moses, this will be the beginning of months to you? Why didn't Moses already know that? What do you think happened? Was he changing the beginning of the year suddenly? Was he making a new beginning just for Israel? Had Israel lost sight of Jehovah's calendar while they were in Egypt? Had Jehovah ever given them a calendar before? It's a good question. Because some people say, well, that the law only come at Mount Sinai. Does it matter about the calendar? Does it matter to Jehovah's people today? Is the calendar that the world follows today correct, and where did it come from? Is there anywhere in Scripture that talks about this? You know, once again, we want to prove all things and hold fast to that which is true. We want to follow and worship the Father in spirit and in truth. So, let's go to the Scriptures. It says, well, I'm glad you asked that question, right? Yes, Jehovah had given a calendar before this, and we see it in Genesis 26:4. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give unto thy seed all of these countries, and thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commands, my statutes, and my laws. So wouldn't Abraham have had to have a calendar if he was following God's statutes and laws? Because when you look up the word statutes, it says feast days. Also, we see in the Garden of Eden, unto Adam also and to his wife did Jehovah make coats of skin and clothe them. What are we seeing? A sacrificial service. By law. It had to be by law. And then we also see when Cain and Abel brought, it says it's a process of time, and you can really tear that thing apart and look at it. And time is a specifically set apart time, not just willy-nilly whenever they decided that they wanted to bring an offering. A specific time, a set apart time did they bring an offering. It says, where did all this go wrong? And is it in the Scriptures? Thus he said, the fourth beast, this is in Daniel 7:23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. This is in Daniel. It's a long study, but it's a basis of what has happened to our time and to our calendar. The fourth kingdom, if you remember the statute that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about, and he couldn't figure out what it was, and Daniel come in and he said, well, I don't know. He said, only the Father in heaven can give the interpretation. And actually, Nebuchadnezzar didn't even tell him the dream. But Jehovah gave Daniel that same dream and the interpretation of it. And if you remember, that was the head of gold, and he told Nebuchadnezzar, you are that head of gold. You are that kingdom. Gold, silver, and each one of them represented kingdoms. You see Babylon, Medo-Persia, overthrowing Babylon, Greece, the belly. This was up here, Medo-Persia, and then Greece, and then the fourth, that's three, the fourth was iron, and it's Rome. It was Rome. The two legs of Rome. And it says that they would, what? Tread it down, break it in pieces. It says, in the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall do 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given unto his hand until a times dividing of times. Here's how you understand prophetic time in the Scripture. That's why in Genesis we read about the days of the flood. God put it there for a purpose and a reason. He also says in other parts, a day for a year. That a day would stand for a year. So time dividing of time would be 360 plus 360 plus half of 360 would make 1,260 days, a day for a year, 1,260 years. This was a prophecy that was given that he would think to change times and laws during this period of time. It is considered in our history the Dark Ages. So, of course, times and laws, if you look in the Hebrew, what are we talking about? Times. God's feast days. In fact, if you read the Douay, which is a Catholic Bible, the interpretation right here says that he will change God's feast days and laws. They knew exactly what was changed. So what does the times and laws mean? We went over that. In the Hebrew, times is the moed, or set apart days, or feast days, Shabbats, the law concerning them. So in 325 AD, we see Constantine, the Roman emperor that lived from 280 to 337 AD. He changed Yehovah's Shabbat to the Sunday, and later in the Pope, starting in 530 AD, replaced all of Yehovah's Sabbaths and feast days with pagan days of worship. To this day, and that's the short of the story. You can prove it by history. History fathered prophecy. That's a novel idea. Yeah. The whole history of what's going to happen is in Daniel. If you understand what's being done and said there. So, we see that Constantine supposedly was converted to Christianity. In fact, if you remember, if you read about his life, he was not only a emperor, but in Roman times, emperor was God. And of course, they had their own pantheon of gods that they worshipped. He was also a great warrior. Supposedly, one day, God supposedly shows him in the heavens a cross, and he says, "You will conquer in this, in the name of the cross." Wow. But we see what he did. He felt like it was a good thing. He was going to bring Christianity together with the pagans and therefore create a harmonious unity. Aren't we seeing the same thing today? The cry is unity, unity, unity. Brother, let's just come together in love. Yeah, coexist. It says you can believe that and you can believe this, but let's be all one body. Let's just come together in love. It says at this time the calendar used for the known world then was a Julian calendar. Julius Caesar. The calendar that is used today, the world over, is called the Gregorian calendar, named after Pope Gregory, who was Pope from 1572 to 1585 AD, and introduced his calendar in 1582 AD. It further cemented all the pagan holidays into the calendar, also changed the beginning of the day from 12 noon to 12 midnight, beginning of the year from Aviv to January. Because in the Julian calendar, beginning of the day was 12 noon. The beginning of the year was still celebrated in March, April. And as we said, not probably last week or whatever, that's where April Fools comes from. Look it up. April's Fool was those people that hung on to the beginning of the true beginning of the year. April. March, April. So they call them April's Fools, because that's really not the beginning of the year. The beginning of the year is in January. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on. So, who is this fourth beast? Thou, O king, art a king of the kings, where he told Nebuchadnezzar that he was this head of gold, Babylon. He says, after three shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom was Rome. Shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdued all things. As iron that breaketh all these shall it break into pieces and bruise. But we know the end of the story. We see that this great statute showing all of the nations or the kingdoms of the world, when it gets to the feet part, it says God's kingdom is cut out of the mountain without hands and strikes the image upon the feet and breaks it into pieces. That's God's appearance. That's Jehovah's kingdom that he brings about. Because he says, I will make you my battle axe, and with you I will break the nations. So we're going to wind up, I think, this one right here. So the prophecy said that this would happen and that would last for 1,260 years. So we take 538 A.D. plus 1,260 years equals 1798 A.D. So what was so great about 1798? What happened? We see that this is, once again, history following prophecy. French General Berthier took the Pope captive, put him in prison, breaking the power of the Pope's control over the state and the church. This is also in Revelation. We find this same story. Revelation 13:3, it says, and I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death. If you remember, the little beast that has the horns. And his deadly, it says, he was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. Wow, it didn't kill him, although the Pope died in captivity. But it broke the power, and this ushered in the French Revolution. French Revolution lasted for 3.5 years. They took the churches that were Catholic, turned them into houses of reason, took all the Bibles and the books and piled them in a pile in the middle of the street and burned them, because they had had enough of the Pope's iron hand over them. But it turned them totally against God, because he was setting as God himself, because that's what's on his crown. I am Christ on earth is on the Pope's crown to this day. So we asked, how was the wound healed? Back to history again. In 1930, Mussolini, the dictator of Italy, gave the Pope, set him back up on the city on 7 hills, what is known today as the Vatican, gave him his money, his bank, his railroad. Healing of that wound. And we are seeing the whole world start to wonder after that beast. So that's how important God's calendar is. Like I say, don't believe anything that I've showed you here. You dig it out yourself. You dig out when the new moon is. You dig out when the year begins, and so forth and so on. I hope that this will spur you to do that, because there's going to come a day when you're going to be asked these questions. Are you going to be able to answer? Are you going to be able to stand? He says, study with that word to make yourself approved, that you can answer those questions that come in. Why are you keeping Shabbat? Why are you keeping these feasts? Why are you keeping the feast at this day, at this time? Well, because Dan's calendar said so. No. Nope. That won't fly. Won't fly with Jehovah or man either. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Thank you for watching a teaching from Emet HaTorah. If you are ever in the Odessa area, we would love to welcome you to our Shabbat service, 11 a.m. every Sabbath. For more information or for more teachings, feel free to find us on the web, www.amethatorahodessa.com. Also, you can find us on Facebook. Thank you. God bless you and your family. Shalom.